Welcome back to Steward with Sophia Li. In honor of Earth Month, we're launching a 3-part live series recorded at 113 Spring, a space that's redefining what it means to age well and live fully. Our first episode explores the ecology of living well, demystifying longevity by exploring the relationship between our bodies, our minds, and the living world around us. And what does living well even mean if the systems that sustain all life are in collapse? This is the conversation I've been wanting to have. Let's get into it.
So who has been here to 113 Spring before? Any raise of hands? Ooh, one, two. Okay, cool. Exciting. So as Celia mentioned, 113 Spring is a new wellness destination in the heart of Soho that merges longevity, science, sustainability, and immersive design. So those were a lot of buzzwords. Let's get into it. Before we address this conversation, I need to address the paradox of being a functional human being today. Who feels the tension right now? Just to raise his hands. Just a little bit, right? So just to recap, the global wellness industry is now worth over $6 trillion. Americans alone spend around $50 billion a year on dietary supplements, biohacking, cold plunges, peptide stacks, glucose monitors. These have become the new status symbol of the aspirational class. We have become obsessed with living longer, yet we have lost half of the world's topsoil in the last 150 years. 40% of the world's agricultural land is now considered degraded or seriously degraded. And our food that is grown in that depleted soil now contains 40% fewer minerals and nutrients than it did just 50 years ago. We spend billions optimizing the body while bankrupting the earth that feeds it. And somewhere along the way, longevity, this conversation, it got privatized. It moved indoors into lab clinics, supplement stacks. It got into morning routines, and it really detached itself from the systems that actually sustain life. Meanwhile, the buzzword sustainability, it disappeared. It got flattened into a 24-hour news cycle. It became filed as too abstract, someone else's problem, or I'll deal with that in the future. Or it got rebranded as, I'll just use a glass straw and paper bags and everything will be fine, right? So tonight, let's unravel this paradox together about how our personal health span doesn't exist in a vacuum. The idea that any one of us can biohack our way to longevity while the broader living systems around us collapse, it's the ultimate marketing scheme. So this is the illusion of individual longevity. So hello to my incredible panelists. As a way to get familiar with the specifics of what each of you do, can you just ground us into the system you work in and how you found yourself in that system? Ara, let's start with you.
Sure. First of all, thank you for that horrifying yet interesting introduction. My name is Ara Katz. I'm, as you said, co-founder of Seed Health. I work in the field of microbiome, which...
Wait, who has heard of Seed before? Okay, everyone.
Okay, so we've done doing our jobs. But a lot of people know us. I think you predominantly know us because of our products and our innovations in probiotics, which are really a big part of our bigger work, which is to really look at the microbiome. And so the microbes that constitute predominantly bacteria that constitute our bodies, but also we do a lot of environmental work. So for us, the microbiome is, we have about 76 trillion cells in our body. Over half of them are non-human. So if you just think we work in the part of us that are 50%, the other 50% of us.
Wait, 76 trillion?
There's about 76 trillion cells in our body. About 50% of them are microbial. So predominantly bacteria, but viruses, archaea, protozoa, other, phages, etc. And then of course most people also think of the microbiome as the gut. And it is used kind of synonymously, but actually it's mostly just because the gut microbiome is the densest. It has the most amount of species in the body, but actually closely followed by the mouth, which has over 700 species. And then really the reason it's important to bring up in the context of today and explain the microbiome in the field, the orientation I come to this conversation with is because microbes exist really on every surface of our bodies that interface with the external environment. And then, of course, the external environment has its own microbiome that also interfaces with us. And so, even the gut if I can just give you like a way to think about your anatomy, even your gut is actually, because we're two-holed organisms, is an external surface. So actually the entire GI system is actually faces the outside because we have two holes. So it's actually also considered an external surface. And so the way that the environment we interact with, all of our mucosa, our nose, our skin, our gut, our eyes, really each, and then of course different parts of our skin have different microbiomes. The information that we get from the environment deeply impacts how our microbiome responds. And so at Seed, we've looked at we do a lot of environmental research programs and also a lot of programs around human biology. But predominantly the world that I spent the last 10 years in was how we then use microbes to be able to impart positive either biological or ecological benefit to whatever ecology we're applying them to. And most people who probably raise their hand know us because we make human symbiotics, which are probiotics and prebiotics combined. But we also make probiotics for honeybees, and we also have programs for probiotics for coral reefs too. So I can get into that when it's appropriate. But we look a lot at the invisible world that we can't see with the human eye that actually plays a huge role, not just in our health, but in the health of the environment.
Wow. I mean, can we just like have some gratitude for bacteria? I think
we've unfortunately spent a couple of centuries trying to kill them all, and now that's part of the problem. But
no, exactly. Can we, sorry, just really fast, can we just like touch on that, what happened? Because I think since the pandemic and everything, it's like bacteria is bad, and it's like, no, this is why we are alive.
Well, I'm writing a book about women's health and the microbiome, and I just wrote this whole chapter called From Microbes to Misogyny, because we really couldn't. We've treated microbes very similarly to how we've treated women and other communities, actually. But it wasn't a really quick history. Like 1674, we couldn't even see microbes until we had a microscope. 1670s, and then about 200 years later is when, like, if you heard of like Joseph, like Louis Pasteur, of course, and by the way, understanding microbes is very important because like certain pathogens like COVID-19, of course, are important that we understand how they behave, and certain pathogens, but really less than 1% of microbes are actually pathogenic. Majority of them are either what they call commensal, which is really like kind of neutral, or beneficial.
Less than 1%.
Yeah, less than 1% are pathogens. But we learned about them because through what was making us sick. And that's, of course, when the birth of penicillin and the birth of antibiotics came around. And so we really kind of then believed that sterility and was the answer to everything. And as a result, I mean, you can look at, ads from like the 1950s, 60s, like where Lysol was making, women's health products to basically women were putting Lysol in their vaginas, specifically to be clean for their husbands. And so, of course, we have had a lot of unintended consequences. But that idea of all microbes being bad has really led us to a very over-sanitized world that has actually completely depleted our microbiome, of course, our crops, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and of course, many of the ways, pesticides, it has led to really this idea that microbes must be eradicated. And of course, that is leading to probably the demise of all humanity with antibiotic resistance. And we've overused these antimicrobials to such a point that, and it created, of course, like a whole way of thinking about cleanliness, which has its own systemic problems that becomes political and societal also. And what's kind of quote unquote dirty and what's clean.
Oof. Yeah, we sterilized our bodies, we sterilized our ecosystems. Yeah. Okay, Daphne, ground us into the system that you work within as Sky High Farm Goods.
Well, first off, thanks for having me, Sophia and Celia. This is really just a wonderful group to be a part of. So I'm Daphne Seybold. I come from very far afield in that I used to work in luxury fashion. I had a company called Comme des Garçons and Dover Street Market. And it was during that time that I was there for about 15 years. So working sort of at the apex of this very creative industry, very much enjoyed it. And then, the pandemic came along and I had a very hard time elasticating back. Essentially, I'd become more involved in the work of a nonprofit upstate called Sky High Farm. It's about 2.5 hours north of here in Ancramdale. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the area, but it's about 30 minutes south of Hudson. And this is a farm that was founded in 2012 by the artist Dan Colin. He is very much a practicing artist still, and essentially founded this farm and from day one used regenerative growing practices. And the team on the farm would donate 100% of everything they grew to communities that have been deprived of fresh food. So primarily Black, Brown, and rural communities in the tri-state area. Over time, that organization has flourished and is really sort of involved in addressing food systems issues across the breadth of those issues. So not just trying to solve or water the fruit, but really kind of looking at the root of the issue. And now they work to both educate the communities that they serve. They're also granting funds, so putting resources in the hands of farmers who are practicing this very specific type of farming, but do not benefit from the subsidies that the big agro-industrial complex receives. And we also do fellowships, so really paid internships that allow people who are interested in food systems work to come in and actually learn what it means to steward the land and have a relationship with the food system so that they might go out and undertake that kind of career or work. But essentially, my sort of integration into that organization as a founding board member led me to this sort of realization that perhaps there were intelligent ways to fund this kind of work where typically nonprofits are very much dependent on the largesse of the very, very wealthy and the very few. I mean, not everyone can write $1 million check, but also very much dependent on grants that often come with institutional interests, and then, of course, on government funding. And we know how inconsistent that can be when an administration changes. So really the idea or the seed or germ of an idea was born to create an entity that could exist within a capitalistic space that could essentially pull levers within capitalism to help us generate revenue for the farm's work as well as advocacy for this type of farming.
What does that structure look like?
So essentially, we're a for-profit business. We were very intentional in how we set ourselves up in relation to the nonprofit, understanding, having spoken with, the likes of Newman's Own, Patagonia Leadership, Red, just understanding how they were structured and some of the bureaucratic and systemic hardships that had sort of befallen them as they were trying to navigate doing this very good work in an infrastructure that was not built for it. So we made the concerted sort of choice to set this up as a business that could be malleable, that could be nimble, could respond to market forces, and create a real kind of touch point to individuals and corporations so that we could further galvanize their participation into this work. So we're sister organizations, each doing very different things, but essentially the brand has been built to only serve the farm. It only exists for that sole purpose. And we've essentially committed to giving away most of our profits to them when profitable.
Amazing. Thank you, Daphne. Lulu, ground us into the system you're in.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here tonight. I, too, used to work in fashion about 9 years ago.
This is like a group therapy for former fashion.
How much are we willing to say?
Celia also, raise your hand, you used to work in fashion.
You're recovering from the retail
You're recovering
industry.
from fashion. Look, wow. She's like, please. Rebecca's like, me. Yes. Okay. Tell us, Lulu.
I mean, so about 9 years ago, I'd just been promoted in my role. I thought I was at my dream job organization doing the work that I love. Like on the outside, it looked like life was perfect. I was traveling. I had a great discount.
Where was this discount?
When you have 60, 70% off Chanel, at a certain point, younger in life, you think that you've made it. But on the inside, I was waking up almost every single morning with a massive migraine or just so chronically fatigued. I had trouble getting out of bed. So I was compensating for that with 3 iced coffees before breakfast, if I even had breakfast, because it wasn't a priority. The priority was getting to the office, opening up my inbox, checking my emails, and, perhaps working my way through lunch if my calendar was packed full of meetings, and eating whenever my headache came, because I knew that my headache was from, well, I didn't know at the time, but Once I got the headache, I realized, oh, something's off. I should probably eat right now. So, all of that adrenal fatigue, that overwork, overexertion actually manifested itself in my menstrual cycle. I ended up marrying the lovely gentleman here. And there was so much stress and chronic inflammation in my system that actually on the day of our wedding, August in Tuscany, my period came early and I bled through my wedding dress. And then there were a series of other events. The board meeting that I was supposed to be at to present a $350 million plan that I had been working on for months. I couldn't make it because I was laying on the bathroom floor just in excruciating pain. There were so many signals and so many messages from my body calling out for help. And it wasn't until I continuously couldn't make it to work, missed important life events, that I finally saw it as a wake-up call. So I go to my gynecologist, and her solution is to put me back on birth control, put me on steroids, opioids for the pain, put me on antidepressants for my mood swings, and or if things get really bad, I could consider some type of surgical solution. And I just thought to myself, is there no other solution? Is there nothing else that I could try that's less invasive, more natural to work with the rhythm of my body before I go down this path? And that's essentially how I found my way back to traditional Chinese medicine. My grandfather actually ran a hospital in Hunan, China. It was the hospital that I was born in, but growing up as an immigrant in this country, and I came to this country not speaking a word of English when I was 5 years old, my entire journey of growing up was learning to be American by fitting in and shedding everything that made me different. From not bringing my grandma's ginseng chicken bone broth to school and opting instead for bologna sandwiches and Lunchables. I mean, come on. To, not really, I think, understanding and or outright rejecting this Chinese medicine wisdom that I grew up with. And it wasn't until this point in my late 20s when it felt like the standard medical system didn't have answers for me. That's how I found my way back. And really excited to chat with you guys more about the principles of Chinese medicine. But at its heart, it's really about learning to live within the natural balance of yin and yang in our bodies. How do we live in greater connection to circadian rhythm, the rhythm of the sun, the moon, the changing seasons, and for women, our menstrual cycles. It's a beautiful 28, 32-day rhythm that really we can learn to optimize and work for our bodies. And then broader, I think there's elements of yin and yang in terms of living with connection to the seasons and to nature. And I mean, so many modern studies show that when we're living in connection to nature and its seasons and spending time outdoors, being nourished by the sun in addition to food as thy medicine, we experience such better outcomes. So excited to chat more.
Wow. What's so sad is that your lifestyle in New York, I think we all can all resonate with that. And that's the norm.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, oh yeah, 3 iced coffees a day, like eating through lunch. I'm like that was like girl boss era. It's like, you go, girl, and that was the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And then getting pharmaceuticals to treat those symptoms, that's also the norm. And that's still the norm. So I want to address, because I think more people would be part of the climate movement if they realize that the climate crisis is a humanitarian crisis and the humanitarian crisis is a climate crisis. Like, why do you think there's this disconnect here? And this is just open to anyone here. I'm just like, what is that disconnect? Come on, tell me. I know you know.
I mean, I think we've done pretty much everything we possibly can to disembody ourselves from both ourselves, but also from the earth. I mean, we see in microbiome, it's very interesting because there's such a direct correlation. It's not even like these ideas are not abstract in microbiome. So like you can look at the gut microbiome of a specific of an immigrant, and you can literally see they did like amazing studies actually on I think it was a large cohort that had immigrated from China to, I think it was Michigan, and just within like 30 days of being on like our diet, you could immediately see, and being within our, our environment, I think it was in a very industrial area. You saw all the microbiome, like massive microbiome shifts, within 30 days, and you see this within. I mean, so with direct correlation between the lack of diversity and soil and in the soil with what you were talking about with like the food. So you see this like, we talk a lot about in the environment, for example, the loss of how many bird species just in North America alone. And I think what people don't realize is that even within our guts, like we are experiencing a great extinction of our bodies. So microbes that used to exist in our guts because we were getting food from the soil, or we were eating certainly a lot more fiber and certainly a lot more plants. And also the density of those and microbial, richness of those foods we're obviously enriching the microbiomes and ecologies of our guts. But you also see, so we are now seeing like a huge extinction, like certain microbes that we had even like a generation or two ago are gone in our guts. And you see that in breast milk. Like there's certain microbes that used to be present in breast milk that are very, very important for microbial transfer from mother to child. And those microbes were also experiencing a crazy loss of diversity and again extinction. So we're seeing the extinction of species also within our bodies, but those are a direct correlation with what's happening in the environment. So microbiome is like an interesting mirror of that, where that narrative can be at least a little bit more clearly drawn, like those connections. Because I do think for people, part of the reason is because these things feel so amorphous.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I love what you said at the beginning about how we've become so disconnected from ourselves, from each other, from the world. And I also think
This is by design, right? Okay, sorry, get into it. I'm like, 'cause we didn't do this to ourselves. We are conditioned by products.
we are conditioned. And I also think there's an interesting, our relationship or lack thereof with pain, our inability to experience any pain or discomfort within ourselves, and that we've been conditioned that whenever any type of minor discomfort arises, we must take something immediately to mask it, to stop it, so that we can be okay. Versus you look at some of the more advanced parenting practices, or the basic tenets of Chinese medicine is any pain or discomfort arising from your body, like whether it's a headache, a toothache, numbness, cold, heat. All of these are signals and signs from your body of what you're lacking, what you need, what may be in or out of balance. So all discomfort and pain are messengers. And the more that we can connect more deeply with ourselves and untangle that, then we can get more information and develop that relationship. But because, to your point, we've kind of become so desensitized within our own system, it's hard for us to have that empathy and relationship to other greater systems. It's easier just to look away. And because it feels, I think, so large, like, for the individual.
Yeah, Lulu, you mentioned the yin and yang of traditional Chinese medicine. So explain how yin and yang shows up not only in our physical bodies, but in our society and in our relationship with our world.
Yeah, so the concept of yin and yang is really related to circadian rhythm and the rhythms in nature. So this idea of like the most yang time of day is when the sun rises. And this is the perfect time in the morning. It's a great time for productivity, for exercise, for work, for movement, all of that stuff. And it's a great time for digestion, to be consuming food. Like big no-no in Chinese medicine is skipping breakfast. And there's now research that backs that up with the impact on blood sugar, cortisol, especially if we're having caffeine before breakfast. But that's my personal learning and journey that I try to mention everywhere I go. And then we think about, as we move from the sun rising, setting, that's when we're going from yang to yin time. And yin, like we hear about yin yoga, it's rest, relaxation. It's kind of the difference between our parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system. And that is the great time to unwind, to go within, to journal, and practice all of those activities. And then yin and yang kind of exists everywhere in terms of not just activities, but in terms of our daily rhythms and in terms of nature. And so we think about, right now the world, we could say, is in a very young period where we're extracting, we're focused on productivity and maximum output. But are we really restoring that yin and kind of putting back what is being depleted? Is a big question.
Yang energy is masculine.
Exactly.
very much in
Masculine versus feminine, too.
Daphne, explain what has happened to our food system, because obviously we're in late stage capitalism. We're in consumption patterns that are
1 minute.
extractive rather than regenerative, that do it all in 2 minutes now. But
How much time have we got? I think just to kind of tie a narrative thread here together, I mean, I'm not a subject matter expert like Ara or Lulu. I really am finding my way through this work as a student. And I think it's funny, I think a lot about how, and I'm probably going to date myself by saying this, but when I was growing up, I remember when, whole milk, fat was really sort of the enemy. And as a result, folks were really kind of focused on foods that were low fat but high in sugar. So a lot of crackers and processed foods. And I've been around long enough to kind of see these trends ebb and flow, and also to understand that so many of the choices I've made over time have been a byproduct of information that I've been fed. And I think a lot of what Sky High Goods is trying to do is really reframe people's relationship to the food system in a way that feels both accessible, that doesn't have to feel like it's in conflict with your everyday lifestyle, because let's face it, like infrastructurally, it's very hard to step outside of the system we live in. But I think that, so much of what we're trying to do is kind of showcase or bring people back to the story or even the plight of the farmer and understanding the origins of our food. And I think to Lulu's point about empathy, understanding the road that is taken by other folks and what that experience looks like is really sort of enlightening when it comes to understanding how you can find a middle ground, or at least even sort of right a lot of the misperceptions that you've had and have been sort of indoctrinated to. But so what's wrong with the food system? I mean...
What's not wrong with it?
What's that?
What's not wrong with it?
What's not wrong with it? I mean, I think maybe the spot that I could touch on is the spot that I'm perhaps the most engaged with, is just really sort of the idea of the commodification of the food system. And what that means historically is really looking at industrialization and the way that we came to package foods. And as a result, how we shaped our food system essentially meet those industrialized needs. Food, when it's grown at its seasonal peak and with the right soil inputs, is its most nutrient dense and will yield the best health outcomes for people who consume it. Where we are right now is in this very sort of relentless cycle of consumption. And the types of foods that are being offered to us are, in this particular phase of our lifetime, ultra processed and don't really resemble their origins. And so, as a byproduct of industrialization and this, and I think a lot of this really stems from a place of inequity, right, that is driven by capitalism. Only certain individuals can have access to the types of foods that are actually nutritious. And I think, it's hard not to sort of ramble on, because this conversation kind of goes out in many different directions. But when we think about what goes into the cheapest possible bite, and how so many people in the country are really able only to afford, that bite that is, the frozen bite in the refrigerated aisle of the grocery store, 6 cents. Are you really going to pick that? Are you really going to pick up the more expensive bite when you're trying to feed people economically? It's a very difficult nut to kind of crack. As it stands, more nutritious food is more expensive and difficult to procure. You also may live in a food desert where you don't have access to that kind of food. And so, I think there are different problems that we're trying to examine here. One is to sort of educate people on what that more nutritious bite looks like, with the hope that they can make more informed choices. Understanding the difference in nutritional value between the cheapest bite and that more expensive bite is very important. But then also understanding that unless people have means and access to be able to purchase it, it's a really kind of cyclical problem that we're trying to solve. So I don't even know if I answered your question. There's too many things that are racing around in my mind right now. But I think my sort of part in this as someone who comes to the conversation not as a subject matter expert, but as someone who has worked in culture and in the creation of products and storytelling, is to really kind of create an accessible pathway for people to engage with products that have been made that are better for you, that are more sustainably produced, that are not extractive, that respect on an ethical level, the livelihood of the farmer and the person that grows the food, and understands that to grow in a specific way, it's much more resource intensive. I found that I can create these vessels that both honor the farmer and the food system I'd like to see, but then also educate the consumer who buys it.
Thank you, Daphne, for saying you're a student in this, because I think we all are, and that's actually the biggest barrier to even wanting to start this journey. And I hope someone can listen to your story and be like, you know what, I don't have to stay in the fashion industry forever, or I don't have to stay in a role like this. I can take this knowledge system and apply elsewhere in a rewarding role. I want to ask you three, because you mentioned inequity and longevity, and I think no matter how we view longevity in this conversation, which is clean food, healthy soil, thriving ecosystems, basic human rights, there's inequity there. And then even if we talk about longevity and the commodification of longevity, peptide stacks, tracking everything, biohacking, there's even more inequity there. So who is longevity really built for? Like, what is the illusion of individual longevity? Where does that stop?
I think it's funny because now that I'm tethered to a farm, I'm really reminded very often that, the seasonal ebbs and flows that occur are the most natural thing, right? Mm-hmm. Rebirth, restoration, death. I think the problem is that we've become enamored with the idea that we should live forever. But in actuality, human beings are meant to pass through the same cycle as every living organisms, on the earth.
And I think there's this idea of, okay, longevity, how long you're living for, and then what's the quality of that time that you're here. And in Chinese medicine, we can't really almost like strive our way and hack our way out of burnout and these cycles, and it's so much about the quality of the rhythm of your life. In traditional Chinese medicine, this concept of Jing is like your essence, like what the vitality in which you're born with. And when we do things like, pull an all-nighter or deprive ourselves of nutrients and foods or overwork, burnout, this overexertion, it actually robs from our Jing and our this like essence that we're born in. If you think about it as a bank account, it's like you're just taking from that bank account, and that feeds into the Chinese medicine of qi. Qi is like your vital energy. If you continue to steal from your Jing, your reserve, then everything that's keeping you going day to day, it's almost like fake qi, right? It's like we're having coffee, stimulants, NAD synthetic for energy. It's all synthetic, 100%. And that's robbing from your reserve. So you're really just depleting your bank account of life. And maybe you're doing some surface level fixes that vital signs look good, but what about how you feel longer term when you don't have all of these additional kind of band-aid solutions? And so that's where it really comes back to very simple concepts of like, are we resting enough? Are we giving ourselves space? Do we have connection? Like a lot of these really basic principles of nourishment, joy, living with the seasonal rhythms, connection, these are things that modern science is proving to be essential for our longevity and health. And as Daphne was talking about, just how the food system is moving or has been moving to like just cheaper, faster options, we think about the quality in which we engage in the act of eating, how we eat. Actually, and I'm sure Ara would know a study around this, but how we eat actually impacts how that food gets metabolized. Chinese medicine, one of the most common imbalances we see is an imbalance when someone is chronically stressed, full of inflammation, on the verge of burnout, or chronically burnt out. It's an imbalance in the spleen. And the spleen is actually the organ that's responsible for transforming food into nutrients. It's the quality of our digestion. And I always like to remind people the quality of our digestion also relates to how we digest thoughts, emotions, how we process those things in addition to food. So if we're eating in a state where we feel highly anxious, highly frustrated, or angry, like I remember my grandma used to always say, don't eat when you're angry because it's going to impact your digestion. She's 100% right.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's like no matter how nutrient dense you're eating, if you're eating it with so much stress, your body's not going to absorb those nutrients.
No, it's
Also-
too busy producing cortisol.
Yeah. And also, Lulu, I love when you said you cannot biohack your way out of burnout. I'm like, yes. Ara, is the longevity business telling the full microbiome story, or is it just commodifying it?
I mean, look, I think that anything that starts to get reductive on any side is problematic, right? Because you said at the beginning, we're going to have a very nuanced conversation. And I think it's so easy to say, oh, $6 trillion, like just to take we work in like orders of magnification at Seed. If anyone knows like the Ames Power of 10 films. So I was going to say, let's start at 10 to like, the 20th for a second. We as a Western society specifically are headed in a very, very scary, bad place from like a overall like collective health perspective. The rate of cardiometabolic disease in this country, of more than 50% of like countries like Kuwait, like obese. So I think that it's really important to also see where some of these like, or where some of this stuff also comes from, which is that, and from fashion, I always say to my team, like, you have to start on the runway, right? So everything everything has to start somewhere. So the global kind of consciousness and shift towards wellness can be talked about very skeptically. I could give like 5-hour talk on like the bullshit that I see every single day and how ridiculous it is. And I think in some ways maybe you can't biohack, but I also think we are now attuned, as an example, like we were and are continuing to be, but like I think now areas, for example, just like sleep, just as one example. Now there's inequities around sleep. Like if you work 3 jobs and you're working night shifts, sleep is a very different conversation than the people who are going and reading Matthew Walker's book and getting their Oura ring and tracking their sleep. And so absolutely but I do think that there is still something to be said about at least like moving our way. Like I never thought I'd walk by Dunkin' Donuts and have it say protein in the window ever in my entire life. And I never thought that, and yes, even maybe the expression of that isn't right. Maybe the protein still has a lot of sugar and it's not the best way to consume protein. But I do think that like some of these things and the way you have to shift consciousness sometimes does have to start somewhere. And it usually does start with things that have to, and one of the other things just to attune to, which is really important as we like end up, because we could definitely have, and I really can support a million arguments about all the ridiculousness, but just to give some counter thoughts and a really, really great example, I work with, because we're collecting so much data now, which has its own disembodiment, and that's its own like spiritual thing of tracking and making our bodies into machines and all we can go in, it's an existential conversation. But with this much data, and when you're talking about inequity, this much data is also going to lead us to very accessible answers to a lot of really big problems in health. And I'll just give you like one really small example. I work with the Human Phenotype Project, which is the largest and like richest human health data set that exists in the world. It was started out of Israel. It has cohorts in Japan, UAE, but the Israel one is incredibly actually diverse, and about 30,000 people have been tracked over 10 years with like every metric and omic and CGM and data that really could be collected. And one of the really cool things we published about recently was that now, just because we've been capturing people's voices over 10 years and we have all of this other data about them, just off of voice alone, we can start to hear predictions of certain diseases. So if you just think about the fact that and I work with OpenAI, right? The health team at OpenAI. If you start to understand the way people are using AI now in places where there's like hospital deserts. And I'm starting to see that actually, and the way payers and insurance companies and some of the solutions we're going to have are no longer going to require or will allow us to address a lot of the inequities that we're currently seeing, because if it's voice and someone just has to make a phone call to be able to collect some specific, very small amount of health data around you to give you a lot of value and information that you could have otherwise not gotten. You couldn't have gotten an appointment. You have to go, then your insurance wouldn't cover it. And so I do actually think that there will be, now, if you want to have a conversation about how we all got here, that's certainly there's a lot of systemic problems there. But in terms of where we are today, the money being spent is also being spent in a way where we're going to learn a tremendous amount, that I actually think there will be interesting use cases that come out of it. And I see it all the time, at least from a scientific perspective, where applications of this are going to address a system that is fundamentally broken today, just to offer like a counterpoint.
No, thank you for that counterpoint. It's like, what is that Devil Wears Prada quote? It's like, if you see a Syrian blue, Daphne, you know the full line. I know you do. What is it?
The cerulean blue
Yeah,
line.
you see the cerulean blue on the runway.
Yeah.
You see it in the
It's not just an ordinary blue.
Season. Exactly. And so that's your thing. It's like it starts on the runway. So even if Dunkin' Donuts is advertising protein, it's like at least the masses, we're starting to understand that we need more protein in our diet, even if it is filled with sugar.
Yeah.
But there's attunement, right? There's something that then happens that also, it can also lead to like consuming and consumption, and most things are through this lens of, to your point, consumption, information, ideas, other people's ideas via social media, and of course the actual things we are buying with money and our time. But I do actually believe that we are in a very extraordinary moment right now, and I think that if we are able to marry some of the ideas that we're talking about here with some of the extraordinary capabilities that we are that actually is now in a lot of people's hands, not just a few people's hands, particularly things like AI. I think there are some really beautiful things that will also come out of it. As I said, I could speak for hours of the negative things, but I do think it's important to like hold some space because I think there are beautiful people working on things in the world, and I work, again, the scientists I work with every day are not thinking about how to make like white bros live forever. That's definitely not why they get up in the morning. They get up in the morning because they're like, I can now take 13 days of CGM data and I can predict type 2 diabetes 12 years out better than a hemoglobin A1C test. So what does that mean? If someone has, and we will start to have them, just disposable CGMs for so many people we are going to be able to be so more predictive. And so that's so powerful. We just published that paper and that's huge. And so I really do think that. And how did CGM start? Started as a bunch of white bros, and it started as levels, and like people couldn't afford it, and now insurance companies, payers, and now we're going to start to see that with AI, with these big data sets, a little disposable CGM thing that now, by the way, because all of these wealthy people started using them and wearing them, now it's trickled down. Now they're cheap. Now they're in some cases non-invasive. And literally going to be like less than $1. You're going to be able to get it. And guess what? There's going to be an AI model that's going to look at 12 days of that data and tell you if you are at risk a decade from now and what you can do literally today to change that. To me, that actually is a great example of how this, it goes from, it ends up in the sale bin potentially, but also could really help a lot of people as a result.
Yeah, no, thank you for this counterpoint, because I think in this conversation, we need to hold multiple truths at once. Mm-hmm. And AI can be scary and energy intensive and all the things. And it also can bring so much accessibility in the inequities we have.
Absolutely.
Daphne, you were going to...
No, I was really fixated on what Ara was talking about. You know, I really kind of come to the work as just one individual. I think I was frustrated with the lack of agreement I felt with some of the way, our government was proceeding. I'm also an immigrant and, have always wanted to live and work in the States and just was becoming a little disillusioned with how the sort of direction things were heading in. But just seeing also that, it's a hypothesis, I think it's probably true. But just, at the end of the day, you have government, you have corporations who are very much, their mandate is to support their shareholders and enrich them. And then you have individuals. And I think I'm simply an individual in this work. And I see that series of micro actions, or at least trying, right? It's the summation of all of those micro actions that can maybe provoke enough of a cultural dialogue to incite a movement. But unless we're willing to attempt it, I just think that the task of trying to approach this work from a place of purity is actually near impossible. I think, my younger self would have said, burn it down. Let's really kind of try to reconstitute it from the ground up. But that's a totally impractical way of trying to find solutions. In the last sort of 4 years that I've been doing this work, through these partnerships that I've had with various brands, many of whom are very much imperfect. I mean, if you look under the hood, it's not great, right? There's no such thing as clean money at the end of the day. But what I see is that money could be spent to obviously improve certain outcomes. And, we've raised about 1.5 million in the last 4 years just for the sale of goods, but also through galvanizing participation from the corporate sphere, which to me is like, these are funds that would have been moving through the system already that I'm now sort of rechanneling to a place that I think that they can be used very valuably. So I'm less interested in, I acknowledge that the system is broken, but I think my place in this is as an individual, maybe I can unlock some kind of channel that ensures that the funds and the dialogue are sort of heading in the right direction.
Thank you, Daphne. So I guess my final question for you three before we go into Q&A is, we obviously live in a broken system. As we've seen from the beginning, everyone is experiencing this paradox and this tension. And I think it's really important to acknowledge it, because it's like, it's like if we ignore the migraine, it's like it's still there. And it's actually more, it's more dissatisfying not to acknowledge it. Like once I just recognize all the systems and everything that's happening, it's like, phew, okay, now everyone feels the same way, right? It's like this camaraderie there. So how do we optimize health within a broken system collectively?
A lot of my work is really about starting with ourselves, the individual, and how do we give agency back to the individual? Because Chinese medicine is really the world's oldest system of preventative medicine. In ancient China, the doctor's role was to keep you well with food as thy medicine, herbs, acupuncture, massage, Tui Na, Qigong, like all of that. So if you got sick, you actually stopped paying your doctor. Imagine the difference and the alignment of incentives if the role of healthcare and doctors were to keep you well. But so much of that role of the doctor was also to impart that knowledge so that you could best understand understand your body as a system, so you could wake up, look at your tongue in the morning, see like, where do I have an organ of imbalance? Where do I have inflammation? What is going on in my gut? What foods should I be eating? What should I be avoiding? What does my body actually need? So a lot of the work that we do at Elix is about imparting that knowledge and giving it back to the individual. We have doctors of Chinese medicine on the team who do one-on-one consults to teach you how to read your tongue, to help you understand what is your pattern of imbalance. Do you run hot? Do you run cold? Do you have a deficiency, stagnation? So then you can have more agency over your body as a system. And I think what we learn is that when an individual feels like they have more agency over their bodies, they can have control over the outcomes through very simple daily lifestyle, behavioral, or food as nourishment fixes, then they feel more emboldened to enact greater change within their organization and the broader system, because we feel like, oh, we actually have the power to do something different.
Lulu, when we go home tonight and are in front of the mirror, how do we read our tongue? I'm like, just give us a quick. I'm like, I need to look at my tongue while brushing my teeth tonight, and I need to know what's happening.
Yep. So one thing I love to teach people is, a lot of times we think we're fine. We think we're managing our stress and we think we're fine. But if you stick out your tongue and you see the tip of your tongue is bright red or deep red, the tip of your tongue is your heart organ. So that could be related to issues with sleep, like worrying, like just a lot of overthinking. If you have red dots on the side of your tongue, that could be a sign of stagnation. Like, there's opportunities for us to improve circulation for things to move through. If you see a crack down the middle of your tongue, that could point to a yin deficiency or issues with digestion. Again, things not moving through. And then it's really interesting to see, do you have like a white coat versus like a yellow coat on your tongue? In Chinese medicine, you could have inflammation that's heat or dampness. So if you see the white, I've got to tell you, we love our salads in this culture, but Chinese medicine says raw veggies are harder for your system to digest and extract the nourishment. So if you see that white film on your tongue, avoid the salads, avoid the iced coffees, the iced drinks. Your body wants warmth and nourishment. And then if you see yellow, that's a sign to avoid the heat inflammatory food. So I'm talking, my favorite stuff, like the French fries, the curly fries, the fish and chips, basically anything fried, you want to be avoiding.
Everyone stick out your tongues. I'm like, let's see who's. I'm
In
serious.
microbiome.
Like, lioness, stick out your tongue. I'm like, your spleen. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, I'm like gonna take this. I'm really gonna do this tonight.
Call me if you have any issues.
Thank you, Lulu. Daphne, Ara, any thoughts on how do we optimize our health in this broken system?
You should go first.
I mean, I think what we didn't talk about yet today, which I think I actually love the way you, we'll talk about everything, but I think you're very intentional about language. And I don't know if we talked enough, like I should have mentioned more about like language tonight, because I do think we have to align on what we even mean by health. I think that's like the most important thing. And what do we even mean by longevity? What do we mean by the new one, peak span? It's like new paper comes out now. It's not health span. It's peak span, and the language of this stuff is so actually I see it in my world because of how I get DMs and messages literally all day from people who have health issues. And the language is really important. And I'll just say maybe how we at Seed and how I've come to really define health, because I think it's so important, because I think we've done with health what we did with beauty and what we did to women with beauty. I think predominantly is like we've made basically health this like image of a destination and like utopia that one day we will reach. If we do this, we will one day be you will get health. And we've made it look a certain way also. I think we've done like what Photoshop did to women. We've basically done with health. I think we've made it We've made it predominantly, I think, an aesthetic endeavor, and we've made it like measurable. So we've turned it into our bodies into machines, and we've made it basically like the new beauty. And so I think what's really important is that when we at Seed, we say health is a verb. It's really something that you actually do. And the way we define health actually in microbiome, and when you look at any ecology, actually, even environmentally, you see this in agriculture, it's not really about quote unquote balance, but actually health is really about resilience, because any system is going to experience stress, changing of seasons, stress, right? Like change of experience, like an interpersonal thing that creates stress. Food is actually, in biology, or in science, food is considered stress. So a system comes under stressors. You just live in this environment. We live in this built environment for the most part. And so it really is not so much about whether or not you ever get sick it's really about resilience and how quickly you can actually, your ecology can kind of come back to stasis. And I think that's really important, because when you ask the question, and it's really about how do you get to health in a broken system, I think the way you define it for yourself is so incredibly important, because when you think about that, first of all, my whole body relaxes when I say it that way, versus the way that I think it's being marketed to us,
Or like projected
projected onto us, which is really, I think, also scary, and also has its own inequity to that image of health. But when you think about the fact that like there is no way that you're never going to get something, you're just moving through the world, like you're going to experience it. And so when you think about that definition, and you think about health as truly just a measurement of resilience, then it really just becomes about, well, how do you cultivate resilience? And actually resilience by definition it exists in stressors. A broken system is a stressor. And so then the question just becomes, well, how do you find meaning, purpose? How do you thrive? How do you make your micro impact and contributions, and how do you do all of this, like to your point about like when we first sat down, you're like, oh, the paradox of just being a human right now. How do you take that in and then also be resilient in doing so? And I think that's actually like one of the most important things because I think the way that we process even the definition of it in itself creates like a whole way of orienting in this world that then makes us feel like we have to do something. Like to your point, I mean, even Chinese medicine, like so many of these things are still, I feel something, I'm doing something, I feel something, I'm doing something. And so we end up in that like reaction, and so I think there's a lot to be gained by changing the language of how we talk about health.
Health is a measure of how resilient.
Yeah.
I love that. Daphne?
No, I like that a lot. I guess the short answer is I don't know. As I get older, I feel conflicted about the fact that I've created all these sort of layers in my life. The built environment, the self-imposed pressures around what I think I should be doing, how far along I think I should be. Now I have apps to help me basically deal with the anxiety that I've generated around the lifestyle that I thought I wanted. And I think for me, maybe the answer, and it's not going to be the case for everyone, is just about simplicity. We didn't get to talk about soil today, which I was excited to talk about, but I think understanding on this journey that I'm on, the relationship between the land and the food that it yields and its greater sort of function in the ecosystem of the planet, like, has been really kind of eye-opening, because it already has in it its sort of natural balances and imbalances that it self-corrects. A function of that is sort of time, right? And not wishing to sort of impose a process or timeline on success. I think the farmer's work is like very, very unique in that they understand that they're not in control of any of the inputs, right? And I think that's maybe the folly of human life, is to think that we're so important that we can control our environment to the point where we can shape our own existence. I think watching what the soil can do and the way that it regenerates, restores, sequesters carbon, allows for this incredible biodiversity to exist. It's just like an incredible kind of metaphor to live by and strive for. And so I think is the answer is I don't know, but I think that there are plenty of examples in the natural world around us that can be perfectly instructive.
Maybe that's your answer for all of us to spend more time in a natural
Just
world and
go
just
out
like
and
observe
spend
and
some
just
time.
get lost in it.
Yeah, perhaps. Certainly make you happier.
Yeah. There's so much wisdom in soil. Yes. I'm just processing all of this. Was this helpful conversation? Yes. Okay. Are we feeling like our nervous systems are a little bit more in tune and grounded? Okay. We're going to do 2 questions, Q&A. If anyone has a question, you're going to come up and sit in the hot seat, aka my seat. Anyone? Come on. I know. Okay, Madeline, get up here.
I didn't realize.
Hello.
My question is, from each of your viewpoints and your framings, what is your dream for human beings in 10 years, 20 years? Dreams. Thank you. It's a little bit of a light question.
I mean, I think it's funny. My dad has a video of like old VCR tape of when I think I was 7 years old, and I just stand in front of the camera like very naively, and I just like, I believe that all living things on Earth should be able to live and thrive, and like I just like say, and then I like jump off camera, and the WHO has this definition of One Health, which is just really the recognition of the interconnectivity of all life on Earth. And I know it sounds like maybe a little Pixar-y of me to say, but we've really lost the plot. And every day, I mean, as a parent especially, like I just deeply, deeply, deeply hope and wish and dream that there is a world where we consider the interconnectivity of all life on Earth and inclusive of ourselves. But I mean, we're burning our home down, and I think that if there's some major shift in consciousness, I could wish it would truly be that.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. I think like Ara, I'm very optimistic that this current phase we're living in of just the acceleration of technology and AI being able to automate things, do things faster, everything looks perfect in AI, that it's actually going to push the pendulum the other way and make us crave more realness, IRL, away from our screens, like that time that we get to spend in spaces like this in nature, looking at things that aren't perfectly shaped or designed. It's going to be that much more precious. And so my hope is that it actually leads us into a space where we yearn to be more in tune with ourselves, with each other, and with the natural world.
Oh, I hope that we can all acknowledge that climate change is happening. If you can't experience it now and see that, that would actually be a wish, is that everyone would acknowledge it. Yeah, I think one thing that I grapple with, especially in the type of business that I've built, is the sort of notion that there could be an expansiveness in wealth, as tethered to GDP, but acknowledging that the world is an infinite space, and that we cannot, I think so many of our so much of our preconceived notion is that there's room for infinite growth and expansiveness. But there is a finite limit to what the Earth can yield for us. And so acknowledging that, I think, is actually really important, and then allowing that to maybe reshape what our definition of success or wealth looks like.
Thank you. Wow. I think we're all in a trance, right? Everyone's like, whew. We keep talking about acknowledgement, but I just want to know it's like when a child has an emotion and you don't acknowledge their emotion, the emotion becomes even exasperated. And I think for so long, when we weren't acknowledging these multi-crises, we felt so in our minds about it. And it's just so, I think, a relief that we can be having these conversations now. Having been in the space for 10 years, it's like we've done a lot in our collective consciousness, and that's momentum and forward progress in itself. We're going to take one last question. If anyone has a question. No? Line. I saw you gave me the, come on.
Hello. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. I learned so much. And I guess my question is about language and tradition. I really love that you touched on that. And I was wondering like how in your personal lives you've rephrased like the language of success for yourselves, and also how we can help like our culture move towards a system where people think of health as a measure of success instead of like all of these material ideals of, you know, what it means to be successful and reach your goals and all of that. And also, how do we make traditions like Chinese medicine more enticing to people in the Western world, I feel. I think there's like already an interest, but there's been so much skepticism around all of these traditions that have existed for centuries, and we're seeing how accurate they were and they are. So how do we make it more appealing to people that have never had like that contact or cultural context?
I guess I could start with that one. I think it's just from having more awareness. And, you know, we always think about how can we break down something that's really complex, like this 5,000-year-old system of medicine, into really simple ways that people can pick up and learn something about themselves and decode something about their own body and their own system. And so that's what we try to create a lot of content around, you know, like, oh, like, how do you read your tongue, to how do you read your urine, your period blood, your poop, like all of these, anything coming out of your body in Chinese medicine is a sign of what's happening within. And this was developed, you know, thousands of years ago before we had the aura and all these ways to track our health. And then I think it's for folks who have tried it, you know, sharing what you're learning with your friends and bringing them along. But I think just how do we make it accessible is really important. And I think to your other question, redefining what success looks like for me in my life has, I think, been an ongoing evolution. And what I view it as today might be different next year, in 5 years, in 10 years. And so something that I'm really working with myself on is creating that space for that evolution and that change, and weaving health as a almost like a marker of success. You know, there's a part of me that's learned to be very ingrained with metrics and numbers and statistics. And rather than shut that part out of this conversation about health and redefining success, I've learned that for my system, it's much more productive when I bring this achiever part along. And I'm like, okay, achiever part, like if we were to incorporate happiness, joy, nourishment, and health as part of the KPIs for life, like what could that look like? And the Aura ring actually is, you know, very helpful, because then I do get that boost of dopamine when I'm like, oh, I got a 91 on my sleep last night, or I'm like a, you know, whatever score in terms of readiness. So I think I've kind of found ways to work with and almost use my system to bring every part along, I guess, for the journey of the greater good.
I mean, just to speak to maybe I think you asked a little bit about like success or, I mean, maybe this is like obviously a little bit off topic, well, off and on topic. I mean, I think, and I would maybe just say to my younger self, I think that, first of all, I think you can't really do anything until you really have, until you know yourself. And I think that you have to spend a lot of time falling pretty madly in love with that person, and having a really integrated and not disembodied understanding of who that person, who you really are. And I think the knowing of self, I think from there, like really truly anything is possible. But I think that being attached to I think attachment in general, I'm like child of like very existential psychologists, so I was I was taught about non-attachment like not in second grade, and so I think that practice of non-attachment, I think attachment to any idea of what you should be is about as the same as going to McDonald's and eating supersizing your fries. In terms of it is as toxic to ourselves overall. And so I think I had a beautiful practitioner who does like guided therapy with MDMA said that to me one day, and she said, yes, you're healthy, yes, you know all the things, and you eat all the vegetables, and you know all the stuff. But what I'm more interested in is where are the parts of your life where you are eating fast food every day, right? And that's not. And so this health stuff is a bit of a mirage, because what you're doing, what are you doing on the inside? What to your insides? And I think that's like a really, I think there's some conversations about mental health, but I think that integration of self is where everything comes from. And I think then from there, like you're not really what is success? Like, I don't know, having a beautiful meal with somebody you love, right? Like it's, and so I think it moves the markers into a different place, and it even makes reading your aura ring and okay, so I had a bad night of sleep. I noticed that I didn't care for myself in the right way yesterday, and so it's reflected. I don't have to be like sit around attached to it. I don't have to like sit in shame about it, but I think a lot of this stuff is really actually just reinforcing the work that we haven't done already inside. And I think that's probably one of the most, because to be connected to the land, for example, takes a certain healing of self, and it's reciprocal, right? Healing is very relational, but I think that like awareness and attunement is such a huge piece of it before we can even begin to tell other people what to do or try and help people or try and even make bigger impact, outside ourselves.
When I started this company, I was 8 months pregnant, and at the time, like I was like, this is a great idea, but in hindsight, it was probably pretty risky. There was something incredibly freeing about not having a plan, and to do something for once that felt totally intuition-led. I think there was no guidebook. There was no path that had been sort of laid out to say, like, this is how you build a business to support a nonprofit. And I think that when I decentered myself from my work and stopped thinking of my work as an expression of how successful I was, but rather poured the energy and desire I had to affect some kind of change into this vessel, like it just, taking myself out of the equation and saying that I was working to support this other thing really helped me to stop looking so much at myself, because I'd been so inured to like what this idea of what, an ambitious, successful woman should look like at this stage in their lives. And, it was really nice to kind of decouple from those expectations. And now, the business I have, we talk a lot about how, the farm is trying to provide a new model for food equity, where most organizations are really kind of fixated on delivering food to those that are food insecure. The farm is really trying to look at a lot of the root causes that allow someone to reach a stage of food insecurity. And I think what I'm trying to do is build a model that then centers this very important work in it. And I'm not part of that equation. I get to sort of sit here and like try to creatively problem solve around it, but like I understand that this is not something that comes with a very clear sense of milestones or guidelines, and like that's been really, really freeing. And I think has at least made me feel like a healthier and happier person. It's sort of like to unlock from whatever that greater sort of matrix was, and not really take it too seriously.
Thank you.
Okay, so everyone has 2 homework assignments tonight. 1, look at your tongue in the mirror. 2, fall madly in love with yourself. And that will take overnight, right? All right, yeah. Easy.
I mean, with some MDMA, it would be a lot easier.
Yes, exactly. That's the next session at 113 Spring. No, kidding. They're like, we did not.
If anyone had the tea.
Let's give a huge round of applause to our incredible speakers, Ara, Daphne, Lulu. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I just feel like at the end when we're talking about diving into self, the more you dive into self, the more you detach from self and realize how interconnected we are.
It's true.
And that's the process. So thank you everyone so much. Enjoy your tea, enjoy the space. Come chat with the panelists. Thank you everyone for joining tonight. Thank you 113 Spring Team. Thank you Celia. Thank you Emma. Thank you Jason, the whole team.
Thanks, Celia. Thanks, team.
Thank you for tuning in to Steward Podcast. If you found this conversation valuable, please share with friends and family who are also grappling with these complex questions. As Steward, we believe that understanding these challenges is the first step towards creating a more sustainable and joyful present and future. Take a moment to rate and review Steward Podcast wherever you listen, and you can also stay connected with us on Instagram at steward.media for more updates. See you next time.